And with that, thank you for joining us again and help me welcome Christiana Moss. Yay.
Thank you so much, Christoph. It was really lovely. And hopefully you can see my screen here. Yeah, okay, looks good, excellent. So yes, thank you so much. And yes, of course, I wish I were there in person. I'd love to see all of you, and especially as students. We love students, and we work with them a lot. You'll see all of the work that we've done on campuses, and hopefully that will also inspire students to do wonderful things there. So the events of this year have certainly shown us that the built environment needs to be reconceived for the 21st century in a holistic and systemic way. On the anniversary of the CDC's determination that we were experiencing a global pandemic, I want to share our experiences and to give you all, students, practitioners, and colleagues, as many resources as possible to address our most urgent design challenges. Architects are excellently positioned to address social and environmental challenges, the greatest design problems that we believe are truly the modernism of right now, because we're good at solving problems. We understand systems, how to visualize them, describe them, and how to manifest them in the physical. We have incredible technology to stimulate outcomes and to also really inspire. And we found that by taking our inspiration from these challenges, we find a tremendous amount of joy. Joy is a radical idea these days, and today I'd like to share with you the work of Studio Ma and the values embedded in our work, which inspire us to know that architecture and design has the ability to solve our most pressing social and environmental issues. So we've taken some time to articulate the values of our practice, which are really embedded in Ma, or the space between. The concept is really about experiential space and the acknowledgement of the collective in all of our making. The idea that we work in partnership, that we advocate for those whose voices are underrepresented in many cases, regardless of scale, that we seek the most regenerative design solutions possible is really part of our purpose. And we're very, very inspired by this. So I'm just going to walk you through our values a bit and kind of describe what that means to us. So leadership through partnership really means that we're working in partnership and spending a lot of time listening and helping groups express their ideas. It means that we ask a lot of questions, and it means that we don't always end up with buildings. Advocacy and value for all, it means that we advocate for and create just spaces, which means that we create places where people feel welcome and feel like they belong. It means that we have an open design process. It means that the people we work with and for feel empowered to express their ideas and to have agency over their environment. Pushing for net positive design and towards a carbon neutral future means that we propose net positive design solutions for every project we do. We educate through simulation and data, and we work on regenerative design from planning a district to a single family home. So articulating our values gives us and our work clear purpose. And this joy is conveyed not only through the making, but also through the experience of the spaces as well. And so I truly believe that we need an army of architects working on these issues. And so if this is an army here before us all, with all of you listening, I would say this is our arsenal. And so I'm going to share with you the tools in our arsenal and walk through the projects related to the resources for each, and to provide those to you and to share really what we use in our practice to be able to advance these issues in the design of our projects. So this is, I'm going to walk through the projects fairly quickly, but I'll dwell on some of the points that I think are important in terms of describing what these resources are for us. One of the first projects that we did in our practice was actually for a utility company, interestingly enough. And this is a utility that conveys both water and energy to the Phoenix metropolitan area. And what they were looking for was actually, they said they wanted a building and a kind of demonstration that went beyond LEED Platinum, and they didn't know what that was. So we did a tremendous amount of research, and out of that recognized, and we realized at the time that the GSA had a wonderful guide at the time about high performance buildings. This was about 2007, 2008. And what they were saying was that it was possible at that time to really be able to generate as much energy as you may consume, and also potentially collect as much water as you need for a facility. And so we tested this on this project, and it was for a utility, and we learned a tremendous amount. And this is the moment that I would say the light bulb went off, that net zero design was possible. Not only possible, but achievable and attainable in the desert, which was, many people said was completely not possible. So we did a tremendous amount of simulation. We worked in collaboration with ASU and also with Bureau Happold to do these simulations. And the outcomes were so good that the utility company was a little worried about this. So it actually did not move forward. But for us, it was something that basically changed the way we viewed the built environment. And you can see at this point, we did some evaluations of what that means for density and for the massing of buildings. And this was, again, in 2007, 2008. So we were looking at actually how much massing can you support on a site given a certain footprint of building. And because photovoltaics have gotten so much more efficient, we actually at least doubled the amount of massing that can be supported now on a certain footprint. So you'll see here, it's like 2.5 3-story buildings that could be supported within a certain ratio. And actually that's increased to about 5 stories now. And that became a template really for thinking about an urban environment and what an urban environment could be in this kind of net zero, triple net zero environment where you were recycling water, where you were supporting everything that you needed completely on the site. So this is an incredible guide. I would say at this point, it's table stakes. If you're designing now, you need to know about this. It's not possible to not be aware of this. And so I urge you to look at the site. It's a wonderful one. It's the whole building design guide. It's one that we use in our practice very often, and it's a great introduction to this idea. The next project I'll share, as I mentioned and Christoph mentioned, we've done a tremendous amount of work at ASU. President Michael Crow there is really a visionary, and one of his visions is about embedding programs in our downtown. And this project in particular really has advanced the idea of embeddedness and generating not only social activity, but economic activity potentially in this area. We have a wonderful arts district that's emerging. And the idea of pairing different programs with the emerging arts district was something that he really envisioned, and so did the dean of the Herberger School, Dean Tepper. And so this project is actually taking programs, some of which are completely new departments like popular music, fashion, and industrial design, and mashing them up in what's really become an entrepreneurial hub in the city. And that's grounded in partnership with housing. So it's a completely mixed use building. And the idea is the students would live here and work here too. It's a perfect studio environment, right? You don't have to sleep on your cot. You can go upstairs and sleep. And the challenge of building densely in the desert is obviously a large one. And you'll notice that the glazing ratio on this is quite low. That's intentional. Glass towers in the desert is I would say, not acceptable at all. So the window wall ratio here is very, very intentional. A little bit of light goes a very long way, and we're trying to reduce heat gain as much as possible in the desert. So being able to put glass where it's needed most is a really important part of this challenge. In the academic space, we have about 80,000 square feet and 3 levels of academic space. these large studio environments really needed to have the best daylighting possible and as economically and as efficiently as we could get it into the building. So we happened to, after meeting Christoph, which was wonderful, we've actually become one of his industry advisory groups for his new software, the new software that he and his team are developing at Solema called Climate Studio, the evolution of DIVA, which we had used a bit beforehand. And we were also very happy to have an intern that he recommended. Her name's Anna McIntosh, that worked in our studio and did some wonderful simulations in collaboration with us in the studio, and tremendous amount of simulation. It's obviously an iterative process. We got to a place where we were able to take that very low glazing ratio you saw and optimize daylighting within those very large spaces through very simple means. And you can see how that, optimizes basically reducing glare, optimizing natural daylight and coverage in the studio. And it was a very specific geometry that actually did this. Most of the glass is facing to the northeast, you can see. And it really informed these spaces, which this is under construction and it will open this June. So we're really excited about it. But you can see how the orientation, the facets on that, the two levels of academic space were very intentional and optimized through that process. And we're very thankful for that partnership with Solema, and it's really been very fruitful. So I'm going to give you a little plug here, Christoph. You should all check this out and look at Climate Studio. It's a fantastic tool, especially on the daylighting side. It's really done, in terms of the speed, it's incredible. So I highly recommend it. Another one of the projects that Christoph mentioned in terms of the planning that we do that doesn't always necessarily end up in buildings, we certainly hope it will someday, is a plan that began with a building and evolved very quickly into an entire student experience plan. So we began asking questions about the campus, and as you know, St. Louis, Washington University is not so far away from the site of Ferguson. And so the campus itself is viscerally connected to that event, and there are dividing lines in the community and around campus that are visceral that you feel. And this outreach was done actually in 2019, and I have to say that these students literally predicted the events of the past year. It was incredible working through this project, but they anticipated some of the largest issues that we had in our student outreach had to do with equity, diversity, and inclusion. And because of this, and because of what we were feeling at the time, we recognized that we really needed to collaborate with someone in order to have a meaningful engagement and discussion about these issues that we knew were bubbling. And so we invited Brian Lee from Colloquate to come to campus and assist with us in terms of engaging students in a conversation about really what students were feeling, how they were feeling around campus, and to describe that. And so what we came up with is actually an emotional heat map of the campus. It was truly a fascinating exercise. And you can see here the results of what was an in-person engagement exercise that then became, you saw some of the tools that we had, which were also on-site versions of this. But we did this exhibit you can see here was actually taking everything in the red zone, which is anger, annoyance, all the way to some of the blue, joy, and everything in between, and asking students how they felt. And you can see here, there was a construction site that you'll see is kind of in the red, but the one in particular that created quite a lot of, there's a lot of red happening in the zone was around fraternities. And students, were angry, they didn't feel safe, they didn't feel welcome around these sites. And we actually ended up doing then a space assessment and quantified the spaces around campus and who they were for. And we did find out of that what students were feeling was actually real, meaning that you could quantify that students certain students were not represented well on campus, and certain students were very well represented on campus in terms of just the physical space. And these are things that have long legacy issues that need to be dealt with and addressed. And this whole exercise is beginning those conversations in very meaningful ways now, to the point that the Divine Nine, which are the African American sororities and fraternities, weren't actually physically represented on campus. They were actually represented in the city. And again, these are long legacy issues. People are now starting to ask the question, why? Why is that? Why does that happen? And beginning to open up that dialogue and create a welcome environment so that those students and their organizations can return to campus and be represented. This is a long dialogue and discussion that's going to essentially involve about a third of the campus, the student-centric area of Washington University's campus, and the north portion of the campus, which is really what's called the Del Mar Divide. So there's quite, and that's really the dividing line between the African-American community and the community, more affluent, predominantly white community to the south. So these dividing lines exist, they're physical, and these discussions have really opened up these conversations about how to bridge those divides and how to actually physically bring people together, both through mixing use and also physically moving students to certain areas of the campus to create a holistic community that actually begins to engage in a meaningful way in the community and the dividing lines that exist. This is a wonderful organization, Design Justice. I encourage you to please check this out. It's a wonderful, we use it in terms of really looking at best practices in terms of design justice in these conversations. And please also look at Colloquate's work as well. Advocacy and value for all. This is the next value we'll talk about. Obviously, all of these ideas are embedded in the work that we've even talked about to date, but these are maybe more specifically focused. This is a project around a student union, one of the largest universities on campus, and the student union that has maybe the most some of the most trafficked areas on a campus. They receive between 20 and 30,000 students a day, obviously pre-COVID. Our post-COVID eyes look at this and say, oh my God, right, where are the masks? But this is what a campus is about an environment where people are welcome, where they feel like there's a tremendous amount of activity. And this is real. This is how it actually felt, obviously pre-COVID. And we'll get back to this time, of course. But creating this kind of environment took a lot of intention, working with students. And this is actually a student-funded project. So the students had direct agency over the space and the things that they wanted to see, which gave us a lot of opportunities. And the spaces that they were asking for were many in terms of the kinds of uses and very diverse uses. We also had the opportunity to look holistically at bathrooms. And so bathrooms are a space where there are many different equity issues that are being brought to bear in terms of LGBTQIA issues, and fantastic conversations are happening around restrooms. The students also wanted a place for well-being, so having a meditation space was part of this program, obviously places to gather. We created this double height space that this actually was the basement at one point, so we connected it to their food. So having food nearby is really important, obviously, to create that dynamic space. A place to make their own videos, and a place to pray, and a place to prepare for prayer, which brings me to the conversation again of restrooms and who are restrooms for, and how do they support all faiths and also all genders. And these conversations are continuing in our projects, and a resource I would love to provide is someone who's done wonderful work in this area is Jill Saunders, and I urge you to check out Stalled, which is a fantastic resource for all of these issues that we're currently working through on some of our projects as well. Finding and creating attainable housing is another huge issue that we all have to deal with. American cities seem to be designed around either single family homes or high rises. It's just the nature of our American cities in many cases. And a middle scale, creating that middle scale was really what this project sought to do and anticipated ahead of quite a bit of a development that has now occurred in that kind of middle scale in the downtown here in Phoenix. And this is in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood. And so just understanding the wonderful vibrancy of this neighborhood that exists and being very sensitive in terms of densifying, but doing it appropriately. So this site would have naturally fit maybe 3 single family homes, and now it houses 12. So 4 times the amount of density that you would have normally had in this neighborhood. But trying to give it a sense of also individuality and the ability to really feel like you were part of a neighborhood. So you have front doors and breezeways and mews that are very appropriate for our desert city. Live work spaces that touch the ground and engage in the context. These are very popular. Obviously, these are really well designed for COVID. So something that has lasted very well, but having almost as much outdoor space as indoor space, you can see these decks were a big part of it, creating that kind of connection to nature still was really an important part of this as well. And this is a fantastic resource that I urge you to take a look at. It's basically ULI's kind of guidelines for attainable housing and responsible land use. So understanding how to densify, but in a sustainable and responsible way, making sure that you're not gentrifying and pushing people out in the process. This is a project for those graduate students that are on or listening today. You'll probably appreciate this. They're often a group of a demographic on campuses that are often not as well considered as perhaps undergraduates. And this is also, I think, a lesson for creating communities in general and creating housing that is truly community building. One of the places where we started here in order to really create an environment that was conducive to building community was to understand who we were building for. No one group is homogenous. No one group of people is, say, the graduate students, for instance. We had to understand that there were several different demographic groups here. And within these groups, there were also other groups, of course, high number of international students. And what was important about understanding the demographics was there were certain assumptions that were made before this was done that a lot of, say, studios or single kind of occupancy apartments were really the solution here because, graduate students wanted privacy. Well, it turns out that graduate students actually really felt a deep need for connection. Not that that's too surprising. We all feel that need. And in our discussions with graduate students, they also said, we really love to cook together, but, and as long as we have our own bathroom, or maybe we could share a bathroom, we'd be okay with that. So there were actually having conversations about areas where people were fine sharing and communing and being together instead of feeling isolated was a big part of this conversation. And there were also, of course, a lot of site issues here. This is an existing building that was on its site, which actually created a physical dam for the entire campus, which actually all of the stormwater ends up draining into Lake Carnegie here. So the existing buildings that were on there were really creating quite an issue. We restored the natural flows of the site, which does also contribute to the feeling of being in nature here, and really a unique experience being in the woodlands, also being in other spaces that we created around a meadow and recreation spaces, all interlaced, through these spaces that connected across the site through breezeways and really centered around a commons building as well, and allowing people views of Lake Carnegie. This is all supported by a geo-exchange system and has incredibly low EUI. on the campus, which is wonderful. We're hoping, Princeton really does want to, they have a very specific idea about how they're generating their solar power, which is actually across the lake. We've heard that they will allocate some solar energy to this project. It hasn't happened yet, but we're well positioned to be considered net zero ready right now based on our EUI, which is really nice. And I believe that you viscerally feel all of this when you're on the site. And so these are just some snapshots of what this community feels like. Having places to go and gather and be in nature and around nature, having front doors for those pet owners. Those are specific units that do touch the ground and you can enter from the exterior if you have a pet. And places to convene. This is the Student Commons area, which is really a wonderful place. And we've heard that the feeling of community has really been fantastic there. We've done some post-occupancy evaluations. It's been really positive. And again, students who really felt like they didn't have a place to convene. This is one of my favorite shots into the dining room of these graduate students where there they are cooking together. They said they like to do that and you could see it. It's wonderful to see students gathering and cooking together, of course. So there's a lot of discussion around the user experience, actually more in software development than architecture, oddly enough, but it's an area of just understanding experience design is something that really talks about knowing your users and knowing who you're designing for. So this is a really good resource, a really good resource that I recommend as well. So you can check that out. And then our last value, sustainability at any scale. This is actually our own studio. I'm currently sitting in it right now. And I guess this is our ode to you can do anything with any building that you're given. You can find something to salvage and something to use from any piece of kind of remnant from the 70s or the 50s that you can find. And this is really what we're going to have to do in terms of our built environment. There's a tremendous amount of embodied carbon that exists in our built environment, and we're going to have to make the most of it. We really are. We're going to have to harvest as much existing building infrastructure as we possibly can to be able to transform it. And so this is what we've done here. We actually did salvage all of the very high embodied carbon materials of the site, including all of the masonry, the slabs that exist here, the cast in place concrete, maximize that. And then everything that was added back for the most part was wood. And this is sustainably sourced. It is a carbonized wood product that does a tremendous job in terms of having longevity. And it actually can be exposed in the desert and it does not degrade. It's actually modified. It's a wonderful product, so you should check it out. It's called carbonized wood or Kebony. And you can see that we use that as a screen wall to wrap the building. And also through that process, created these areas or these buffer areas of landscaping that we're able to engage with. This is also anticipating what we hope is the next phase of development. We actually have the plot of land to the south of this, so we're excited to actually, in our next phase, we are going to be doing a living building. And so we're looking at, currently we're at net zero energy or trending net zero energy, and we're looking at net zero water as our next step. And these are some other images of it as well. You can see here. And this is the buffer I was talking about, the space between the existing face of the building and the screen wall. Daylighting is a big part of this space as well. So we do have some skylights that are strategically placed throughout the studio. And we definitely have some wonderful and challenging glare issues in some cases on our end elevations that we knew about and we are mitigating through window coverings in our screen walls. But these are some images of it from the outside as well. So it's a great place to work, and this is a resource that we use in terms of calculating our embodied carbon on our projects. We've used Athena in the past, but this EEC3 tool is also a really great one that we're using more. So this is a wonderful resource as well to understand embodied carbon, which when you begin to do embodied carbon calculations, you'll find that they, in terms of getting to carbon neutrality, it's a tremendous amount of carbon actually in materials. And so understanding that and tracking that is something that we're doing in our projects. And again, in terms of adaptive reuse, it's essential to understand these issues. This is a project that's a museum, and it's actually began as a transit center that was abandoned because there was a, in the city of Scottsdale, this idea of a kind of hub and spoke transit plan that failed, didn't do very well. So this was a piece of property that they wanted to really repurpose into this idea of a museum about the West. And for us, we love the Desert Southwest. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to really think about what the West means. So you can see that the building is organized around a courtyard, and that sky space is incredibly important in terms of orienting yourself, paying homage really to what the West is in terms of the sky and the quality of light in and around that space is really wonderful. Circulating around the courtyard, it's really a place that you come to, and it's a place that you orient yourself around. It's obviously oriented in terms of the cardinal directions, north-south, and the circulation of the entire museum really pivots around that courtyard. You can see these upper galleries are situated in ways to actually self-shade what's beneath it. So we did quite a lot of simulation, both in terms of daylighting, which was predominantly focused in the areas of circulation. Obviously, exhibits really need to be protected. And through that process of not only looking at massing and optimizing massing, but looking at daylighting as well, we were able to reduce the amount of energy quite substantially from a kind of baseline museum. We did look at a number of different massing scenarios, and through that process, as I mentioned, optimized the massing of this so that it did self-shade. And you can see the volumes above, which are kind of lightweight, basically steel framed, and they're basically on top of the cast in place or tilt up walls beneath them where the mass is. This also describes the flow of water from the courtyard to the plaza. And this is something that we were intentional about, the idea that you could reuse condensate, collect water, and actually move it through the courtyard was something that we worked on quite a bit. And let me see if we have it. This is an image of that courtyard. And what happens there is that we actually collect the condensate in the mechanical system, and that's what we call the weeping wall on the north side of the courtyard. We work with Caldwell Shellor, landscape architects, on this idea. And that wall then collects the condensate. It runs down that wall through the courtyard and actually into the plaza. So I'm looking for that diagram, but it's okay. So it moves through the space into the south, and people actually can see where the water goes, and they understand kind of movement of that through a series of runnels. So this really talks about the biophilia that inspired us, not only the massing moves that we made, but the ribbing of that concrete, which is inspired by the ribs of the saguaro. And it's something that truly inspires the work. And this is, I think, the last project that I'm walking through today, but it's our vision of the future and what I would say, a regenerative design future could look like. This is a concept design for a research facility at Arizona State University, conceived of as a triple net zero building around a biome. The biome would actually be a place where water would be both collected and treated, and climatically also kind of creating this zone between an interior and exterior space that could be a temperate environment. And you can see that we really envision this too as a low embodied carbon project in terms of using CLT, mass timber, which is an area that we are also doing quite a bit of research with. We're currently doing some research with the State Department around mass timber, actually. And you can see the environment that this creates, which is meant to be a place where scientists actually research regenerative design and research the effects of carbon sequestration. And this is actually for the Department of Sustainability and the Engineering School collaboration that's occurring currently at ASU. And a vision of what regenerative design could be when we really begin to think about introducing these systems, regenerative systems, into the built environment. It really can be transformative, and the idea that we could integrate landscape and living environments into our environment is something that we're continuing to explore in our work, and we believe that this is the future, and it's exciting to us. So all of these concepts are embedded in the Living Building Challenge, and it's one that we are not only looking at for our own studio, but several projects that we're working on currently, one of which is at Washington University in St. Louis, where they're looking at the possibility of a triple net zero design for their the area of campus we talked about, that's a student-focused area. And this is really the future of regenerative design. And that's where we're inspired to go. So just in summary, these are as I said, the arsenal of tools at your disposal to advance social and environmental equity in the future. And we hope this inspires all of you to become that army and do wonderful things to be able to solve these design challenges. As I said at the beginning, we truly believe this is the modernism of our time to address these issues and to be inspired by them, because it's really the only design problem, in our opinion, that matters right now. And I'll close with that. I will say that we're hiring, so I'm just going to put a little plug in there for those that might be interested in inquiring. And I guess, Christoph, if you want to come back, I can stop sharing. Is this a good time to stop?
I think this is great. Yeah, I can come back.
Okay.
I can see myself on the screen. Here we go. And I think if we stop sharing, then maybe the audience sees that as well. Great. Awesome. Thanks a lot. I wish there was, you would hear the raving applause that I hear virtually in my ears. I just want to remind everybody, oh yeah, now the questions come in. That's fantastic. Yeah, please keep the questions coming. I'll start off with a few questions on my own just to give everybody in the audience the opportunity to ask, but please do. And as I said earlier, our team is gonna go through your question and tries to bring them together into topics that fit together. Awesome. I had some topics that I thought about before, and I really love the idea of this toolbox. And I think that's something that all of us should do, like have more. Maybe that's even the idea for yet another website where we bring this all together and share and review these different resources. I think that was super effective. Thank you. I love just the fact that you've been working on, concepts and ideas of net zero before people talked about it. And nowadays, obviously, there's a lot of talk about it. It becomes, to a degree, a bit of a technology decision, because for many buildings you can say, since photovoltaic has become cheap, I just plaster the building on my site with photovoltaic and I'm done. So, and of course you made a compelling argument that this is not the solution for multiple reasons. I wonder what you think about when people traditionally think about, you know, sustainable building design. They're often, and especially in your part of the world. So I think maybe of somebody like Arthur Brown, who designed, you know, these sun spaces and people sitting in front of adobe walls that are painted black. And we've come a long way since then. So what do you think, how much space for sustainable design, for passive design, do we still have or need to have in our buildings today?
Well, I think we always start there, Christoph. I don't think it's an either or both, you know, it's both and. Passive design is kind of, again, table stakes. You have to do the simple things well, or else, I mean, in my opinion, you're being irresponsible, you know, frankly. Like, you know, I talked about glazing ratios, and, you know, these are things that, unfortunately, I think there are a lot of architects out there that aren't even aware. I mean, I guess I'm going to be a little dramatic here, but I think it's almost a crime at some point. And, you know, these are lessons that you learn through experience. And I've certainly had my own experiences realizing and recognizing when you make mistakes, and it's not good. You know, we have to recognize that that our desire for expression and personal expression is not, you know, is not always that. It has to work in concert with being responsible, and it's actually part of the ethics now of the AIA. It's part of our ethical oath that we're taking, that you will advocate for the environment as part of being an AIA member. I don't know how many people know that.
Oh, it's great that this is part of being a member right now. Is well, you said a lot of architects like a lot of glass. I think that is true, but I think there's also an emerging understanding that this is not the best solution. And what I hear very often, and I wonder how you experience this from especially larger buildings and firms, that the developer expects a lot of glass. So I'm not sure if that's a Northeastern or West Coast phenomena, or if you're experiencing that as well.
Yes, there is an area of the country, maybe it's Chicago, where we get a lot of people interested in a lot of glass. And, you know, it's a moment for educating, right? It's a moment for kind of saying, okay, well, what's unique about where you're building? You know, is it something that experientially people want anyway? You know, I think there are a lot of, in terms of experiences, when you actually ask people how they feel in a completely open glass space, I don't know if, you know, it's interesting to ask people. I think there are many people who don't feel very comfortable in those spaces. And so the idea of maximizing view, there are many ways to do that more strategically. And I think it's just about educating and, yeah, having a dialogue about that and exploring that and saying, oh, well, maybe, why don't we do some surveys and find out if that's really something that your potential buyers really care about. You know, if they don't have a place to put their furniture on the walls, you know, that's not a problem.
Not good.
Yeah.
There's, of course, an interesting relationship in all of your projects. You can develop this deep relationship with your future occupants, right? And or at least you talk with students or groups that are similar in values. Maybe despite the diversity, you get a good sense of how the space is going to be used. A lot of buildings don't have that luxury, right? So, unfortunately, there's this. We design it for the average demographics or a certain demographic group that we want, and we expect they want big glass. Do you have any thoughts on how you can overcome that? Because in that way, there's not even somebody to point to anymore, right? There's just the anonymous user.
Yeah, I think you just have to dig into that. You have to ask good questions and challenge that idea. It's a preconception. And I don't, you know, the question is, you know, are there other ways to capture views? You know, can we look at something that, you know, also addresses comfort too? You know, I think there are issues with glass, right? So I think it's about just asking deeper questions.
Yeah.
and they're not making assumptions, challenging assumptions that people have about what's expected,
Yeah. So. Yeah, I don't want to only talk about sustainability, and I'm giving a few more minutes if we have a few more questions. Please ask your questions. One thing that was really fascinating is this emotional heat map that you created in St. Louis, right? And who really is the client for that? And did you feel that you get a whole cross-section of all the students participating? I'm sure our campus and any campus would greatly benefit from these eye-opening maps. Mm-hmm. We have maps where we have the highest rate of bicycle accidents, another sad map, but I think on campus. But of course, this is at the core of how our campus should be. And I think we should use this information as we are growing our campus, right? That we know where the undesired spots are. So who did that? Was that the university as a whole, or the department that you worked on?
The university was extremely supportive of wanting to ask tough questions, and they weren't afraid. I think their motto has to do with truth.
Yeah.
So the motto of the university was that truth through knowledge, I think, is their motto in Latin. And so really wanting to hear from their students in an authentic way was the goal, and how to engage students in a way that made them comfortable and made them feel welcome was something that, there's a reason why we collaborated. I think it's important to collaborate with others that can engage certain, communities. I approach these issues with humility whenever we engage different communities and different cultures. It's important to understand that you don't know other cultures like your own.
Yeah.
And so to approach that work with humility, and to know that collaborating is often the way that you are able to do that, to be able to get people to feel comfortable. And so we did, having Brian Lee there was incredible. We had a great collaboration just internally to kind of come up with how we could do this. And we also had a great collaboration on site. It was incredibly engaging. And I think the balance of how we work together and how we work with the students in that space was really, created an open dialogue where people felt like they could really express their ideas. I have a lot more that I can share on that, by the way. That was one little tool of many that we used. We did some storyboarding activities, envisioning, charretting activities that we did as well, that were really quite, I would say, successful, because we were able to glean a lot of information from the students. And as I said, what was fascinating about that in our planning is that it turned out that the numbers supported how they felt, and so validating that by measuring, by doing the assessment, the space assessment from an equity perspective was really interesting. To give that, teeth. It's like, okay, well, the administration could say, oh, well, the students feel this way, but when you present the numbers to them, they actually say, oh, really? How did that happen?
Yeah.
I mean, I had some of them saying, how did this happen? And then you start to ask bigger questions, right? Which get to the legacy issues, which uncovered quite a lot. And we had a great discussion around those issues.
Excellent. We finally have some questions coming in, so let me quickly go through them. One is, that's pretty specific. In the design of your studio, how did you reuse the masonry elements from the former building? So I think embodied energy and reuse is of key interest to many of us. So maybe if you can share a little more practical how this was done.
Yeah, so it was actually pretty simple. I think you saw the layers of the building. We actually maintained all of the masonry. We made a few new openings, but for the most part, we used all of the existing walls within that inner layer. So we had the screen wall that was outside of that, that zone. And so we used all of the masonry, and we made some adjustments to those openings, but we maintained predominantly the area around the whole studio. We have some acoustic issues. It's a very noisy street that we're on. And so having a masonry wall that faced the street on one side was actually really helpful in that regard. And then our slab, we have our entire concrete slab was reused. So it wasn't difficult.
Excellent. Oh, here's a question that I was kind of expecting. I love it how you go back and forth between, you know, analytical tools and design. And here the question is basically, how do you actually create this balance between analytical data-driven architecture and the creation of joyful spaces? And since you focused on both, right? So I think there's a lot of interest on how to make these decisions. Do they go together? Do you see friction points?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. You know, in our studio, you know, we're very collaborative, and I'll just kind of make a little shout out to my partner in life and work, Chris Alt, who's really great at, well, we do have a lot of fun when we all work together too. But, you know, there are obviously really important lessons about just, you know, aesthetics and proportion and all of the things that you would traditionally think about that apply to all of our projects, absolutely. But I would say the source of inspiration comes from those climatic and place-based sources, right? So our source of inspiration isn't necessarily, you know, there are other ways people get their you know, abstractions for inspiration in terms of form making, and we get them from our climate and from the people and the place and all of that. But after that, you know, all of the other principles apply, right? So, you know, the building in downtown Phoenix, we spent a lot of time, you know, once we kind of knew that it was going to orient to the northeast, we spent a lot of time composing that and trying to understand the best massing solution. And so the proportions of that tower relative to its base, all of those things were extremely intentional. And, you know, so there's like, you know, good architectural principles that you learn in school, right? They all apply. And, you know, we were trained, we both went to Cornell, and all of those, you know, we have some great design professors that we've worked with over the years, and who taught us good lessons in that regard. Yeah.
Oh, that is wonderful to hear. How much do you think your approach relies on you doing some of this analysis in-house, so by people that you know, as opposed to, you know, if you afforded some of the consultants that might work with you? How key do you think is that?
This is an excellent question, and it's actually I call it my unicorn search right now, because we're looking for people who really have the tools at their disposal, but also love design and have a passion for design. And we believe that, as I mentioned, taking our inspiration from climatic issues and from the simulations, like, that inspires the work. These are things that inspire us. And having the tools in the studio, it's just another design tool that we like to play with, you know, whether it's model making or, you know, all of our, you know, digital models now, and our physical models and sketching, and, you know, energy modeling is another wonderful design tool. And it's something, it's revelatory to have it in your own hands. You know, I have to say that there's a certain level of arrogance that architects have when it comes to taking advice from their mechanical engineers. And I've seen it, I've witnessed it. And I believe that when people have the tool in their hand, they recognize, you know, this is something that, you know, you're like, okay, when I put glass there, this happens. And when I put glass there, oh, wow. Okay. Look at that. It's amazing. Look at what happened. It's amazing. You know, so I think, you know, those are lessons that are important to not forget. And even if they're intuitive, having the data at our disposal and being able to actually support that is something that it excites us, and it's fun. It's a fun part of the process. So I I urge students here to have those skills and to not think of them as these kind of separate, separate worlds or separate places. I see a lot of students who have these skills going into consulting agencies, and that's great, but we'd really love them in our studio, especially if you want to practice both. I think we should all be practitioners that have these tools at our disposal.
I think there are many layers there. I tried to, given your talk was so broad and touched on so many issues, and so do the questions. And I think one here that I really like, what was the journey like co-founding a practice? Where were the specific or memorable struggles you would like to share? And I think definitely what we see is you're so broad, there's a clear role model that you are embodying. So how can we have more Christiana Mosses and Chris Outs?
Oh, that's sweet. But so our founding, we were founded in 2003, and there were three founding members, the two of us, Chris and myself, and Dan Hoffman, who is a kindred spirit. He went to Cooper Union, and he also, a lot of the interests that we had, I would say in school, are interests that he also had when he was teaching. He's now a principal emeritus. He's teaching at the University of Arizona, which is lovely. But we were founded, I had, actually, since I graduated, I worked in other firms around higher education. The minute I came out of Cornell, I ended up working in an office on a project at NYU. So I've been working on campuses since I graduated, and it's been my passion. I love the American campus. International campuses too, of course, but the campus is a place where you have, the best ideas, the smartest people, best practices, and the best planning that you can imagine. So it's really invigorating to work on campuses. Chris came from a background, he actually worked for Wendell Burnett for some time. So he came from, looking and studying and designing very carefully designed buildings and detailing. And then Dan really came from a campus planning background. So we had this really interesting mix up in terms of the three of us. And because of that, we just collaborated really well together, and we all brought a different viewpoint. And the projects you start with are the projects you get. That was something that Glenn Murcutt said once, and I always remembered it, and so true. So we started working on campuses, and we'll probably end by working on campuses too.
That's a good place to be. As you said, these are vibrant, interesting spaces that users. I think I found it interesting. How do you get your first commissions? Because I hear that from a lot of younger architects, being a physicist myself, rarely in that situation. How do you convince somebody, especially on a campus, to say it would be a good idea if we designed your building? What do you think? What is their winning strategy?
When you're just starting?
You're just starting.
Yeah.
Now it's easy.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we worked really hard to get there, and I obviously our professional backgrounds had a lot to do with that. So I had been working on campuses for a good 10 years before I was able to work on one again, and I had to obviously just convince people to give us a little bit of an opportunity. And we started small. We started on little renovation here or there, and and ended up just building from that. So we also did have a couple of, because Dan was a campus planner, campus architect, he had a couple of opportunities that we had when we started, which was really nice. So, and we also, we actually founded our practice. We all decided we wanted to work together, and then we entered a competition. That was our first project. We had a competition entry. It was an NEA sponsored competition for an infrastructure project centered around the canal system here. And it wasn't a project I shared, but it's a really fun project. And it is interesting that we started with infrastructure. And we won that competition. So when we won it, we were like, okay, I guess this is going to work.
Excellent, nice place. I love it. You know, people are asking about your competition, which I think is really interesting. And it sometimes maybe do you feel as kind of a voice in the desert when you speak about extreme measures of sustainability, or do you feel there's a growing community of, you know, firms of similar size that try to embark on a similar journey? Is there a community you feel within the internationally or within the US?
That's a great question. We do happen to participate in a group called the Design Colloquium, which, you know, I have to say we have been, and we continue to be leaders in that area, which is great. It comes from passion. It comes from, you know, where we started. But yeah, absolutely. I think, as I mentioned, and I'm serious, so we do need an army of architects working on these issues. You know, there are people, wonderful people. I mentioned there's a Bill Leddy in San Francisco who's working on trying to make net zero design a code requirement in San Francisco. And we need to be doing that and advocating just the same way here. So he's inspired us to start asking questions about how we can do that here. And people should be doing that. Architects should be doing that in every part of the country. And so, you know, I think at this point, it's about advocating as much as possible. And, you know, once it becomes a code mandate, then at least, you know, that'll help move things forward, right? So it won't rely on necessarily the poetry of that, which we do tend to focus on.
No, I would just that everybody heard that this design colloquium is incredibly interesting. They have an online website. It's more of a closed meeting, but I'm sure if you are in the right architectural firm and you contact Christiana, there's a way in. I think it's every year or every other year, and it's a fabulous, for those who ask the question, a very fabulous group of like-minded individuals. And then I see it again and again. Yeah, location. Again, you're from the desert, you're in the desert. How does this impact your design?
I think it's a huge impact on the way we think. And, you know, this is something maybe more visceral because I mean, a little bit about my background. I actually grew up on a barrier island. I grew up in New York, and I grew up also on Fire Island. And so, you know, I've watched viscerally that island sink, honestly, and get flooded and almost destroyed during Sandy. So that's influenced, you know, our perspective. But being in the desert and working in an environment where climate is unavoidable, you have to recognize where the sun is in the sky. You have to be aware of it. You know, the plant life around you has adapted in incredible ways to deal with the intensity of climate. And these are all things that made us even more aware of the natural environment. And, you know, where water goes, where it flows, these are all things you become aware of in ways where, you know, I think in other parts of the country, you take it for granted, right? I mean, you take trees for granted, you take, you know, you take rivers for granted. And, you know, and these are things that I think when our eyes have changed because we're in the desert, and when we go to other places, those are the things we look for, and the natural features of a place that we concentrate on the most.
No, it's very true. I mean, I lived in bad weather all my life, rain wherever I went. So this question of water is just not as much there. And I would generally say in our architectural education, we don't stress it enough. So, I mean, what do you think? If you think of your toolbox or other ways, what should architects know about water when they are dealing with it? Yeah,
so you know how much we're interested in water. Well, especially here in the desert Southwest, the story of energy and water are completely commingled. And so when you begin to ask broader questions about carbon neutrality, you have to begin to look at the source of water and where water comes from, and how it gets conveyed. and how it gets treated. And all of these things become, really important questions, because inevitably they're related and in this case, inexorably connected to energy and energy sources. So, yeah, it's a process of learning and understanding, and kind of understanding the flow of water, and understanding the pathways of water sources and where they come from, and tremendous resiliency issues around water, and especially around the world. Water is already becoming scarce, if not disappearing in parts, on parts of the planet. And so fresh water and its source, and being aware of it and designing around it and considering it in design is extremely important.
So, which brings me to that, I could note it down, the wall in the museum, the water wall. Maybe I'm hopefully not the only one who didn't get it. So maybe if you explain in a few more words what that does, and if you know whether it works.
Sure. So, it's funny, let me just do this, because I was looking for a diagram that I had there that was in a place I didn't expect it, but here, it's a good diagram. Hold on a second, let me just do this. Hold on, there. So, yeah. So you can see that basically we capture all of the condensate from our mechanical system, which produces quite a lot, especially during, we have a humidification and dehumidification system that's part of the museum. It's a very high efficiency system, but inevitably we produce a lot of condensate. And so at times that actually gets collected, and we express it actually in the courtyard. So it runs down this wall, which you saw, and there are runnels in the courtyard that bring it to a planted area. And then from there, it's actually piped into this bioswale that's out in the plaza. And so I'll just go back to show you some of the images of that. Yeah, so these are the, you can see these are the runnels in the ground. They come down off the wall too. So we collect all of the roof drain water. So the roof drain water mixes with the condensate water that's piped underneath here, and it gets collected in this bioswale. Mm-hmm. So basically doing as much as you possibly can with every drop of water, and reusing as much as you can.
So this is a fabulous space. So questions of outdoor thermal comfort, and maybe also what's the boundary of your site? Like, is this still on your site, what we are seeing here, this wonderful space? And where do you think as architects one should draw the line? Or am I responsible for people just off my site sitting on a park bench and facilitating that? What's your thought there?
It's so interesting because on this project, the boundaries were moved pretty dramatically. And it was through a conversation actually with the city council. We presented the building, and there's only, obviously you have to draw the boundary as tightly as the budget supports initially. And that's your boundary, right? And then when we presented the project, the city council asked some great questions about the plaza, and we said, well, it wasn't included in this funding, and it led them to considering expanding and funding separately the plaza space. So, and which included some public art that you don't see in this photograph, but they did quite a bit. And so kudos to the city of Scottsdale for recognizing that the boundaries needed to be widened and for funding that. So yeah, it's again through a dialogue.
You must be persuasive. No, that's great. And that's of course what we have to be. Here, another set of questions, this notion of, if I use the technical term, post-occupancy evaluation. So how often, what do you see the role of the architect at going back and checking? Is it best, no calls, no questions must be good, or what do you think?
Well, it's an integral part of understanding, your design and what works and what doesn't. And I mean, increasingly, we have to do post-occupancy evaluations. And, we do really think that the Living Building Challenge is an incredible standard, specifically because it actually requires that you measure results. And the results are not about just building performance, it's about occupants and how they feel. And there are actually questions about equity that need to be answered, and social equity. And, so it's absolutely integral, an integral part of the work to do these post-occupancy evaluations. And they take a lot of time. And we haven't necessarily come to a point where we've, formalize that in our contracts, but we're going to need to in order to sustain that, because it's really important. It's an important part of the process.
So what is the process? Do you put on a black jacket and hat and sit there and see how the space is used, or probably not? So how does this
through surveys? Through
okay.
Surveys, we basically we conduct surveys, and they can be done certainly digitally. They don't have to be done in person. And obviously, in terms of the performance side, we get them from people who run facilities, and but to get actually the users to respond to surveys has been the best way to do that. And we do that in different ways. The digital thing works sometimes, especially with students. It's good to just invite them to an event and bring some pizza. That's usually what works.
Students and faculty.
Yeah, faculty too. I like pizza too.
Pizza.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, do you think that's because these are universities, or do you think they're is corporate America ready for post-occupancy evaluation as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been a huge part of workplace design to understand occupant comfort. I think increasingly so now that, in a post-COVID world, people are going to want to really understand what the office space is, what are spaces, workplaces for, and why do we want to gather? Why do we want to be in a place together instead of maybe working remotely? So those conversations are absolutely happening. And so, recognizing what really motivates employees, what really, gets people to be excited about being at work, or, in our case, having people in the studio has been extremely important for us. We've recognized over the past year that, people were feeling really disconnected, and, so working on workplace design around the issues of, occupancy comfort and making people feel the best they can. If they have options to work at home, it's certainly going to become much more of a, optimization in terms of your workplace, because there has to be a why, right? It's not just like a default, you're going to come to work. Why are you going to come to work? And there has to be a purpose around that. And I think that's a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. I'm putting the pressure on that you always think about is, do I want to be in my office? That's absolutely a great concept. I had here, yeah, that's interesting. The question of how you communicate environmental design. I think when I engage with designers, some feel inherently their clients don't want to hear about it. And then I have the impression from you and others that practice sustainability, oh, that's so easy. Is it because you think, as you said earlier, you start designing for a certain group and then the group expects this from you and that facilitates the conversation? Or do you think it has just become easier to embrace sustainable practices?
I don't think there's anything easy about this. Did I make it seem easy?
You did. Okay, wrong impression. No. This is really hard.
It's really hard. There's nothing easy about it.
Okay.
So maybe I should make it sound more hard, more difficult.
Oh, you shouldn't.
This is really hard. It sucks. No,
yeah, I don't know why I'm doing it.
No, it's hard. No, it's but it's worth it. I guess that's what I'm saying, and that's why it does give us a sense of joy because we have purpose. But this is not easy stuff. I mean, I mentioned, the level of advocacy that has to be done, and when you start asking those questions, you get to a point where you have to advocate. You have to, I mentioned our addition to our studio. Getting to a point where we can meet the living building challenge on the water side is a challenge. It's a huge challenge. And, so we had to set up meetings with the city water group and the City of Phoenix's water group and the Living Building Challenge and have conversations with them about their water system and their plans in terms of their own recycling and reuse of water. It's a very complex equation because our effluent, 80 to 85% of our effluent goes to cool our nuclear power plant. And that's what we're doing right now. And there will likely be a day not too far away when we're going to need all of that effluent to recycle and reuse. So what does that mean for our nuclear power plant? It means that we probably need to start divesting from that at some point. And, these questions is not easy. It's not easy stuff. But yeah.
How do you convince them? Are the pressure points guilt into carbon? Is it the joy within the comfort of the people, or is it money? Or just pure need? I mean, what you just described in a way, when it's clearly defined, we're running out of water here and this machine won't run anymore, then nobody can do anything about it. I assume that's easier than convincing people to go triple net zero when there's no immediately perceived need. Right?
There's certainly tipping points, and we're seeing that, of course, now. It's amazing, and I think, Chris and I have talked about this, but it's amazing how a quick change of leadership very quickly changed the dialogue almost immediately, overnight, literally, to the point where you have a company like GM saying that they're going to produce all electric cars by 2030 or whatever. Right? So these things have tipping points, and they unfortunately are very political in many cases. But the resiliency issue seems to be something that is universal. I think people on all sides and in all spaces care about resiliency. They see, obviously what happened in Texas, unfortunately, sadly, calls into question these infrastructural problems and challenges. And I think it, unfortunately and sadly, has to be through those that really people get a wake-up call. So the question is, how many do we need? And hopefully it's not too many. I mean, we all hope that we can plan for resiliency and do that in a systemic way so that we can have the option and not create, basically minimize the amount of suffering, frankly, that has to happen.
Did you hear that question of very concrete resiliency? So do you ever get asked to design something that will run on its own for several days? So how much does your architecture get into actual, like the true question of resiliency? There's a disaster, and I was 2 weeks ago in Texas with my building, and I want my building to still functioning. Do you see your clients asking you that?
I can't say too much about this, but we do work with the State Department, and they absolutely ask those questions. And
they're increasingly looking at more, issues of passive survivability. So I think, you asked the question, or you alluded to the black walls and the dirt, the dirt walls and all this stuff. There's absolutely, we have to think about every resource very carefully. And I think there are low carbon solutions that we need to look at much more. And I think, when we're actively doing that in an area of research right now that we're performing. But I think, the idea of having more passive survivability strategies is something that is a design problem for sure.
Yeah. We are slowly getting towards the half hour. I got a question, which was actually the first question, but I saved it for last, which was, and I think if anybody you can help us answer this, how do we raise above the sadness that we see around us from COVID?
Wait, I'm sorry, say that again, Christoph.
How do we rise above all the sadness that we see around us right now during the time of COVID?
Yeah, I think, I hope a major theme of this was conveyed, that finding your purpose is a big part of that. I think we all have to be more, we all have to work on our resiliency. And I mean that, mentally, and I mean that, physically and from all aspects. And so what's incredible about this last year is that it's really shown a light on areas of inequity in so many different areas. And it's also shown a light on mental health, and things that, we can do. I know in the studio, we've had people affected by this. And I'm sure you can all relate to this. And, part of finding joy is difficult, and it is a radical thing to say these days. But we truly believe that you can do this by reflecting on your purpose and finding it and working every day towards it. And that's the place where we feel like we're doing good work. And, I think if you can all find a place where you can do that good work on a daily basis, then that really helps. It helps to bring joy, for sure.
That is a wonderful way, I think, of ending our conversation. I think the key moment was, I think there's so much positivity in your work and in your whole studio and your whole team, that it feels simple. You can say it's not simple. I think when people think it's simple, that's supposed to be a compliment always. So thanks a lot for joining us. But again, if anybody is interested in working with Christiana, contact her directly, let me know. As I said, we need a lot more of them. Before closing, I was asked just to do a few more remarks. I wish usually, of course, I would say, let's thank the speaker, and I'm the lonely clapper in the desert, but think about everybody who has been joining us. That concludes our event tonight. I just wanted to thank you all again for joining us this evening. And of course, mark your calendars. Hope that you can join us for the next event, which is next Thursday, March 18th at 6 p.m. same time, for Blueprints of Justice. It's a research studio conversation with Cherise Perry, Virgil Abloh, Nora Al-Haida, and Juana Staniescu, in collaboration with the Architecture and Urbanism Group. See the full list of upcoming events at architecture.mit.edu. And we hope you see all again with us. And thank you, Christiana.
Thank you so much, Christoph.